Before going into the Koryos pattern itself, I want to bring us back closer to our modern era again, away from the Neolithic we have been exploring. In the aftermath of World War II, as the world grappled with devastation wrought by unprecedented conflict, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung sounded a warning about the resurfacing of ancient, powerful archetypes within the collective psyche. One such archetype that Jung pointed to was that of Wotan and the Wild Hunt, a complex and enigmatic figure deeply embedded in Germanic mythology, but really deeper than that in Proto-Indo-European mythology. As Wotan's influence seemingly erupted in the tumultuous times of the mid-20th century, Jung cautioned against the unconscious forces that could drive individuals and societies towards chaos. In the exploration of the Koryos pattern, we find ourselves delving deeper into the echoes of Jung's warning and the intricate web connecting this to the archetypal patterns of the Koryos. By understanding this historical context, we aim not only to shed light on the latent archetypes that influence the past, but also to bring them into conscious awareness in the present. Jung believed that recognizing these archetypes was crucial for preventing their destructive manifestations and fostering a more conscious and integrated cultural narrative. So this historical lens offers us an opportunity not merely for retrospective analysis, but for a proactive engagement with archetypal forces. So by exploring the Koryos pattern and its historical manifestations, we seek to reintegrate these archetypes into our modern consciousness. And this exploration is not an exercise in dwelling on the past, but a deliberate effort to ground ancient patterns in our contemporary culture, drawing inspiration from rituals that, in their essence, can serve as transformative tools for collective growth and understanding. Where, within the coming sections, we will go into the Koryos pattern, and later also go into different individuation rituals, where especially the Orphic mysteries are relevant. And we will go in chapter 5, the return of the self, deeper into the reintegration of these archetypal patterns into a modernized setting. And this archetypal force, often associated with war frenzy and the untamed aspects of the divine, manifested itself in various ways, leaving an indelible mark on history. Wotan's presence was palpable in the political and ideological landscape of the era. The fervor of nationalist ideologies, the rise of totalitarian regimes, and the collective embrace of militarism echoed the archetypal call to arms associated with Wotan in his shadow form. Leaders, driven by a fervent sense of destiny and a vision of a renewed society, became conduits for the archetype shadow expression. Missing crucial elements of these rites and a deeper understanding needed to reintegrate it consciously. Culturally, the Wotan archetype manifested in a frenzy of artistic expression, often characterized by a return to ancient, primal themes. The arts, literature, and propaganda of the time bore the stamp of this archetype, reflecting a collective fascination with the untamed, the heroic, and the apocalyptic. In examining the Wotan archetype, we find an intriguing connection to the Koryos pattern. The Koryos, as a collective and ritualistic expression of youthful energy and vitality, shares resonances with Wotan's untamed and wild aspects. Also linked to the German youth movement of 1896, which roamed Europe and also performed animal sacrifices at the winter solstice, linking this behavior directly to the Koryos, which we'll see later as well. In the late 19th century, amidst Germany's repressive and authoritarian social climate, clusters of young individuals sought refuge from the urban landscape, yearning for a liberated existence. Inspired by a romantic idealization of nature and diverse cultural heritage, they sought solace in communal living, adventure, and the pursuit of traditional values. As time passed, these groups fragmented, spawning numerous independent organizations under the overarching name of Wandervogel. Despite organizational distinctions, a shared ethos persisted among these youth factions, fostering a sense of unity within the broader movement. And within the German youth movement, one can observe a spectrum of reactions representing the varied responses of German society to the ascent of the Nazis. While some embraced Nazism as a vehicle for liberation from the perceived injustices of the Treaty of Versailles and an opportunity for Germany to regain its former glory, others remained skeptical or actively opposed the regime. Both are manifestations of the unconscious forces that surge through societies seeking outlet for expression. The Koryos pattern, while not inherently destructive, like the unrestrained manifestation of the Wotan archetype in its shadow form, draws from the same well of primal energy. And by understanding the historical context in which Wotan emerged, we gain insights into the potential consequences of untamed archetypal forces. The Koryos, in its conscious and intentional form, offers a channel for the expression of youthful vitality in a constructive manner, steering clear of the chaotic manifestations associated with Wotan. And as we explore the Koryos pattern, let us be mindful of the lessons embedded in the historical manifestations of the Wotan archetype. Because by acknowledging these archetypal currents, we pave the way for a more intentional and conscious engagement with the powerful forces that shape cultures and societies. And the concept of bands of young warriors with a dual role, both living within and apart from society, is widespread in various Indo-European contexts. During certain periods, these groups would venture into the wilderness to hunt and raid other communities, while in the remaining time, they were tasked with defending their own society. They were guided by a senior male and lived off the country by hunting and engaging in raiding and pillaging foreign communities. Wolves and dogs were regarded as mystical symbols representing death, lawlessness, promiscuity, and the fury of warriors. The association with these animals signified a state of liminality between invulnerability and death, as well as between youth and adulthood. A defining aspect of these young men's communities was the initiation ritual, which involved living outside the norms of society, often in stark contrast to its values. Additionally, these warrior bands were closely tied to specific animals, particularly dogs and wolves. The Koryos also having been linked to dog and cattle sacrifice as well, which has been strongly established in the field. You have, for instance, the Krasnomarsku midwinter dog sacrifices that have been found in an archaeological dig. They found 51 dogs and 7 wolves who were sacrificed and consumed. The dogs, according to these findings, were well treated during their lifetime, and they were probably familiar pets. The ritual focused on the sacrifice of dogs in a place and era where dogs were typically not used for food. While cattle and sheep were regularly eaten at a location all year round, dogs were primarily slaughtered during the winter, which contradicted the usual dietary practices. Parallels with Indo-European mythology link this to the initiation ceremonies in which boys were introduced during the winter into youthful war bands that were sent away to conduct raids against other communities. Dogs, such as Cerberus, were linked to death across various Indo-European traditions. Because of their strong association with death, dogs, next to wolves, thus were also connected with war bands and warriors, this being their totems. The Koryos, Proto-Indo-European for army, people under arms or detachment, or war party, refers to in the Proto-Indo-European sense to a brotherhood of warriors in which unmarried young males served for several years as a rite of passage into manhood before their full integration into society. Scholars have theorized the existence of the Koryos based on later Indo-European traditions and myths that feature links between landless young males, perceived as an age class not yet fully integrated into the community of the married men. They served in a police army, sent away for part of the year in the wild, where they hunted animals and raided foreign communities, then defending the host society for the rest of the year. A big part of this was their mystical self-identification with wolves and dogs as symbols of death, lawlessness, and warrior fury. The idea of liminality between invulnerability and death on one side and youth and adulthood on the other side being another important factor. The Koryos were composed of adolescent males, presumably from 12 to 13 up to 18 to 19 years of age, usually coming from prominent families and initiated together into manhood as an age class cohort. After undergoing painful trials to enter the group, they were sent away to live as landless warriors in the wild for a number of years, 4 to 9 years, within a group ranging from 2 to 12 members. The young males went without possession, other than their weapons, living on the edges of their host society. The Koryos were seen as being closely connected to the gods, especially thunder gods, and were believed to possess supernatural powers and abilities. The Koryos were believed to be particularly active during the winter months, when the world was at its darkest and the forces of chaos and destruction were believed to be at their strongest. During this time, the Koryos would engage in various forms of ritual activity, including hunting, feasting, and dancing, as a way of invoking the powers of the gods and strengthening their own abilities. The connection between wolves, dogs, and youth warbands is well known in later comparative Indo-European mythology. These brotherhoods of warriors consisted of unmarried young males who served for a designated period before reintegrating into their host society through a rite of passage into manhood. Initiation rites of this nature, where boys lived in the wild, emulating the behaviors of wolves and dogs, are documented in ancient texts from Greek, Latin, Germanic, Celtic, Iranian, and Vedic societies, all tracing back to a shared Proto-Indo-European origin. In Latin, such groups were the Sali, while Greek had the Ephebes, Germanic the Wild Hunt, and the Celtic had the Fianna. The reconstructed Proto-Indo-European word for these young warrior bands is Koryos, roughly meaning war band or unit of warriors, derived from the Proto-Indo-European noun koro, meaning cutting, section, or division. Equivalents of this term are found in various ancient languages, such as Old Persian kara, Lithuanian karas, Celtic koryos, Ancient Greek koiranos, Germanic harias, and Old Norse herian. The lives of these warrior bands revolved around military duties, hunting wild animals, and pillaging settlements on one hand, and the recitation of cattle theft legends and heroic poetry about past heroes on the other hand. Leadership within the band was determined through a game of dice, and the outcome was considered the choice of the gods. Though next to the young boy, who would be the leader, there's often also a guiding mentor figure involved that already went through these rites, often linked to a thunder deity, next to a recurring dedication to a goddess figure, representing from a Jungian lens a combination and working together of both the hero archetype with the archetype of the wise old man or mentor. The first being linked symbolically to ego consciousness, where the latter is linked to the Jungian self, where the rite itself and identification with the wolf serves the purpose of shadow work and defacing and integration of the primal self. And raiding cattle from neighboring tribes, sometimes on horses, was also a characteristic feature of these Indo-European cattle breeding societies. The Koryos, in a more mythological sense, were also known for rescuing cattle, grain, fruit, and fish from either a witch or serpent. The witch or serpent in its form representing the destructive aspect of the psyche and the force which withholds the flow of vitality and the vital waters. Much like what we had seen with the figure of Trito linked to thunder and cattle. And another intriguing facet of the Koryos tradition is its potential connection to musical instruments, reminiscent of the ancient Greek askalos, such as the bagpipe-like instruments created from the whole hides of sheep, goats, dogs, or cows. Additionally, there were flute-like instruments similar to the aulos, which originated in the Neolithic period. The aulos, known as the tibia to the Romans, was a wind instrument in ancient Greece, commonly depicted in various forms of art and supported by archaeological evidence. Much like the Great Highland bagpipe, the aulos had a history of being used for martial music. While the term aulos is often translated as flute or double flute, it was predominantly double-reeded, and its sound was described as penetrating, insistent, and exciting, bearing a closer resemblance to the bagpipes. Interestingly, the Celtic Highlanders had later developed their own version of the bagpipe connected to warriors, drawing possible connections to these ancient instruments. Next to this, the lure, a Bronze Age wind instrument found in Scandinavia, the carnyx, a type of Celtic trumpet, but also the more known bagpipes, all played a role in ritual and religious practices. One significant historical depiction of the aulos can be found in the battle scene of the Chigi phase. The Chigi phase itself is a Proto-Corinthian picture that was found in an Etruscan tomb at Monte Aguso near Vio. On it depicts an aulos player with an advancing hoplite phalanx. This musical accompaniment within ancient times played a crucial role in maintaining the formation's integrity, preventing potential openings. Furthermore, evidence of similar instruments is not limited to Greece alone, as references to the aulos and related instruments have been found in Anatolia. A sculpture of such bagpipes was also discovered on a Hittite slab at Uyuk in Anatolia, dating back to 1000 BC. These instruments, in of themselves, share Indo-European roots, hinting at a potential Proto-Indo-European connection. The aulos and related instruments are then also most likely intricately linked to the Koryos tradition. And they would have served various purposes for them, but also, like the other instruments like drums and rattles, they were used to induce trance-like states during sacred dancing rituals, being a key feature of the Koryos tradition next to the reciting of poetry. And the instrument's roles in warrior hunting initiation rites across later descendant traditions associated with the Koryos tradition would make this a plausible theory. And the members of the Koryos initially served as young unmarried males without possessions before their eventual incorporation into the Techtwe, the tribe, people under arms, composed of the property-owning and married adult males. You can also see this in the distinction between Mars and Kuurnis, the latter being linked to the men of the tribe, where the first is linked to the landless young man. And the period of initiation within the Koryos was perceived as a transitional stage preceding the status of adult warrior and was usually crowned by a sacred marriage ceremony. The Koryos ritual was a rite of passage for young men in Proto-Indo-European culture, in which they underwent a symbolic death and rebirth process to become full members of their community. The ritual involved a period of isolation, fasting, and spiritual purification, followed by a ritual hunt or battle, and a return to the community as a transformed individual. Especially in later times, even though in earlier times they did real battle too. And the Koryos ritual may offer some parallels to the individuation process in Jungian psychology within this later form as well, which involves a similar process of confronting and integrating the shadow and other unconscious energies. The isolation and purification stage may correspond to the process of withdrawing from external influences and focusing on inner reflection and introspection. And the symbolic hunt, or battle, may then also represent the confrontation and integration of the shadow and other archetypal energies, which can lead to a transformation of the psyche in a new sense of identity. And as it is known that the integration of the shadow also often leads to the, cessation of fear of death, knowing what the Romans said about the Germanic people, for instance, with their lack of fear of death, it's a pretty plausible theory to suggest that they probably underwent something along these lines to integrate that and to overcome that. They become such fearless warriors in that sense. But there is also another ritual in which the young men either dress up as their ancestors or have otherwise a connection to both their ancestors and the underworld after roaming through the village, where they become, through this final ritual after the Koryos period ended, part of the tribe and eligible for marriage, where they become in later form something like Odin's wild hunt. According to the legend, the wild hunt occurs on specific nights of the year, often around the time of the winter solstice, with there being a strong connection to both ancestors but also the underworld. The wild hunt was often seen as a portent of death and destruction. It was believed to be particularly dangerous to those who encountered it. Those who were caught up in its path were often cursed with misfortune and ill health, and were believed to be at risk of being carried off to the land of the dead. Despite its ominous associations, the wild hunt was also seen as a symbol of the power and mystery of the natural world. It was often revered as a sacred phenomena. Odin, next to the Germanic Holda, sometimes appears as a leader of the wild hunt, a ghostly procession of the dead through the winter sky in winter. The dark winter sky being a representation of the underworld and with it the unconscious. And within the Koryos tradition, there's also in the later descendants of it a continuous theme of warriors connected to sacred dances and hunting or warrior rites linked to both a thunder god and a goddess, which can have both a nurturing side but also is sometimes depicted as a wrathful feminine figure. Often then this feminine figure takes the form of a she-wolf or she-goat who nurtures the infant. And within this final ritual, the young men who have returned from the Koryos die only to be reborn later as a man that has been integrated into society. The boyhood ego ritualistically dies, is taken apart to be dissolved in the collective unconscious, to be reborn again. The final death and rebirth ritual is normally finalized at a later point with a marriage ceremony where they become a full man that is part of the tribe and community, which symbolizes the union of opposites, and with it the Jungian self. The death and rebirth ritual itself is a purification ritual, where the elements of the shadow are purified in a sort of alchemical psychological process and integrated into consciousness. This includes both the shadow and also the anima and animus, becoming akin to the alchemical wedding and union of all opposites into one being. The initiation rituals within the Koryos tradition involve the confrontation and integration of unconscious energies, which is crucial in preventing, for instance, also scapegoating dynamics, where it also reconnects people not only with a sense of assertiveness, but a connection to their primal self, key in reclaiming our own inner self. There's also helping people to move from a state tied to society and its expectations and the familial and societal aspects into the wilderness that the scapegoat-identified person is often sent to in a more conscious manner, where the wilderness and underworld experience is turned into a process of reclaiming the parts that were lost, and thus reclaiming the authentic aspect of the self, something that will also be highlighted in the Korybantes section and their connection to the divine child, that will more deeply be revisited in the Orphic section of the book, when it comes to Dionysus and the connected spiritual journey. And in that sense, the Koryos ritual for men and also the later Archetype ritual for women are both about the reclamation of assertiveness, our instinctual base, and thus key in leading an individual out of a state of psychological childhood or a state of regression, carrying the potency to kickstart the inner flame and lead the way to the rebirth of the inner self, and is also the reclaiming of the authentic self beyond societal expectations, trauma, or scapegoating dynamics.